shortly we'll be up and running. So welcome everybody to the second speaker in our Colloquium series, and great pleasure to introduce Bill Zahner from Boston University, just up the road. It was a couple of years ago, right? We met at a conference, and very interested in work with SimCalc, and some nice conversations around that. Bill joined the faculty, BU, this is your second year, and we're glad that Bill can come down. We should have been communicating probably a little sooner, but you have many of the graduate students in our program that we're referring to here today, and faculty. Let me just give you a little bit of a background to Bill before I hand it over to him. One thing before I do introduce Bill that I want to push for, we have a blog site that is not being used around each of our speakers or events. So I encourage you all, especially the students, to use that blog to record comments. Those of you taking this as part of the colloquium course, NT 615 or 715, it is required. I've been going back into there, and Rob will now help moderate that site, because it is a moderated site, so you don't expect to see any posts instantly there, but we will keep on track of that. So I do encourage you to engage in the discussion. If anything, then people outside of the centre can see how amazingly smart and brilliant you all are, okay, in discussing the speakers and the themes that we are being introduced to this year. So Bill, as I just mentioned, is from Boston University, is an assistant professor in the School of Education. His research focuses on how students learn important algebraic concepts by participating in mathematical discussions with peers and the teaching and learning of mathematics in high-need schools. Dr. Zahner is currently the PI on a 3-year NSF-funded project at Boston University's the Noyce Scholarship Program. He earned his PhD in education from UC Santa Cruz, where he was a fellow with the Center for Mathematics Education of Latinas, an NSF Center for Learning and Teaching. For this dissertation, Dr. Zahner analyzed how two groups of bilingual 9th graders engaged in mathematical discussions about slope, rate, and linear functions. Prior to his graduate studies, Bill taught high school mathematics for 6 years. So, Bill, it's a great pleasure to have you visit us here. Hope it won't be the first time. We'll see you many other times, because I think there are several people around the table that have intersecting interests with your work. Bill would prefer to spend 45 minutes talking and then use the remainder of the time for Q&A. Okay? So as you're going through, there's a slide that you want to refer to, take a note, jot down your question, and then we'll have a nice interactive discussion after this talk. Thank you, Bill.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. You took care of my second slide, I think, so that's helpful too, or my third slide. I, of course, usually love to be interactive, so if there is a point where you have a pressing clarification question that would help, feel free to pop your hand up, interrupt. I enjoy a little bit of dialogue back and forth. So, nothing like a lecture on dialogue. That's always exciting. Okay. I do want to make sure that I acknowledge that the work that I'm talking about today was funded in part by the NSF, and then the writing up of my dissertation was also funded by the Spencer Foundation. So I'm grateful to both of them for their support in this process. And for those of you who are doctoral students, I hope this is a good model that helps you think a little bit about your dissertation. So I wanted to give an outline of some of the work that I did that might be useful to you as you're thinking about your work. So in my talk today, I'm going to give a real brief introduction. Stephen did a great job getting me up to speed, so I don't have much to say there. Look at one motivating example of group discussions. Introduce the study. I'm going to outline an analytical tool to study the interactive construction of authority. Then look at the mathematical connections made by each group. And then hopefully at the end connect those two parts. And then talk about next steps. So that's where I'm trying to go in this talk today. So that's the rough outline, and that way you know where I am and how soon we can start talking. So really briefly, how I got here today, I didn't just drive. I was a secondary math teacher for about 6 years. Actually, I went to undergraduate at Boston College, studied math there, and then taught math overseas for 3 years, and then in California for 3 years. And while I was a graduate student, I became really interested in, or before I became a graduate student, I was really interested in the question of how mathematical reasoning is mediated by language and languages. So when I taught overseas for 3 years to students who were all learning the language of instruction or who all spoke a language other than English outside of school. I was in Chuuk, Federated States of Micronesia. And there I first encountered the problem that what I thought was universal in mathematics was also highly cultural and contextual. And so the interaction of mathematics and language became an interest. And so I went to graduate school at UC Santa Cruz, where I became a fighting banana slug, and a fellow of CEMELA, the Center for Mathematics Education of Latinos and Latinas, where we investigated mathematics learning in linguistically diverse settings. And so I got a big promotion when I became an assistant professor, not only in title, but in mascot. I'm now a terrier, so working my way up the food chain. And I work on two things, as Stephen said, how students learn algebra and important concepts in particular through group discussions, and high leverage teaching practices in high needs schools. And that I'm not going to talk about today, but if you're interested, I can talk a little bit about the NOIS research project we're starting this year. So I'm really honored to be here today, and I want to say that Kaput's work on algebra and algebraic thinking, and equity in particular, has really shaped my work, and probably in two different ways that I think of that. So one of them is Kaput's work on representations, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And for me, this picture sticks in my mind, talking about the sums of consecutive numbers. And then the work on SimCalc, and I was able, as a graduate student, to collaborate with a team from SRI International on a paper on SimCalc, and that's coming out in the Journal of Mathematical Behavior shortly. I think some of you had the opportunity to read that paper. So in that way, Kaput's work has really influenced some of the ways that I think about algebra and also about teaching mathematics with an equity stance. So I just want to acknowledge that and say I'm really happy to be here. So I'm going to start with an introductory example, and I know it's always dangerous when you have a room full of math folks to put a problem up. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to solve the problem, or maybe a minute, before I show a video. And in this video, this is probably a very familiar problem. It's shown up. It's like as seen on, the NAEP, Mars, balanced assessment. This problem has been around. But this problem is about looking at the perimeter of a chain of hexagons. So what I'd like you to do is take 30 seconds and to at least discuss the first question, which is to complete the table for how many students could sit at a chain of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 7 hexagons. And then maybe the second question, if you imagine that there's a chain of 100 hexagons, how many students could sit there? And think about how you might solve that yourself, or if you were a student, how you might approach that. So take a minute, think about it, and turn to the person next to you.
Yeah, I really don't. Yeah, I guess.
I think they're assuming
That you could fit.
but I can.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I see what's happening. There's change. Because when you add, you're taking away one seat and add one of the front seats. So essentially, you're increasing the total by 4.
Oh, you're talking about 4, right?
All right, I'm already seeing some great discussions here. And some people talking, I think, about a recursive relationship, some people talking about an explicit relationship, some debate going on, which is precisely the intended effect. So what I want to do is take a look at two groups of students who were discussing this, and these groups are from my dissertation. And then we'll come back to these videos in a few minutes, but this is just to get us motivated to think about how they solved this question which is to complete the table. And so let's take a look at the first group, group 1, speaking in English, and how they chose to complete the table, or how they negotiated, I should say.
You need to do the little blue thing.
Let's see if it's working.
Is it the toggle back?
He
and
knows,
forth?
yes, you've got it.
Okay. Oh, good. My video hadn't started yet. Good. So they're working on completing the table right now. I'll go back and introduce the one more of you.